There you go. All right. So thank you everyone for the invitation to talk. I always enjoy participating with the Sangha, listening to talks, and once in a while giving them. Um, so you may have seen in the announcement today, the title is of the talk is "What are you asking for?" So keep that in mind. What are you asking for? And I'll tell you a little story. Many of you probably know that's my style. So Hojo and I have been having a weekly morning Dokusan call for many years now. And well, recently, or it's not so recent now, several months ago, um, well, and as part of that, we often text each other or message each other. Are we on for tomorrow? Is there a conflict? I'll be on time. I'm going to be a little bit late. And back in February, I think it was, I said, I'm going to be a little bit late. I've got a lot of things going on. There's a truck beeping down the driveway, backing in with a dumpster and a porta potty and these things because we are doing a renovation on our home. And we'd gotten last minute notice that I needed to clear out the laundry room because demolition was going to start today instead of the next day, and so on and so forth. So I was a little bit late, and I got on the call, and I was kind of going through this litany of all the things that were going on in this mad dash to prepare for this renovation. And Hojo said, "Well, you asked for it." And yes, we did. We wanted the house to be, we just recently bought this house as part of our retirement strategy, and we wanted it to be kind of just right. So we contracted for a renovation. Um, and anybody who's ever done, my understanding is anybody who's ever done a major renovation or a custom build or something like that swears they'll never do it again because it's just so complicated, so many frustrations. And I see one or two grins of recognition here. Um, and I can confirm that. And we're not done yet. It started in February, and we have a verbal promise that we'll finish in early August when we initially it was supposed to be done by now. Um, but Sensei said, you asked for it. And my initial response was, well, no, I didn't ask for this. This is my wife's project. But then I realized, well, that was a superficial response. That was a cop-out answer. Because of course I asked for it is I asked for her to be a part of my life and to let me be a part of her life. And a part of that deal was to support her in any way I can as joint and equal partners. And this was something she wanted to do. So yes, clearly I asked for it. But that did get me thinking, what really was I asking for in this renovation project? I mean, obviously, I would like some of the improvements, bigger closet, better bathroom layout, arranging some rooms the way we wanted. But for me, the driving factor was really to facilitate my wife getting the living environment that she wants. And that's when I realized what my ask really was. I asked to be with her and to be a part of making her life better, hopefully, in our life together, with all the wedding vow elements that come with that, to support her and her life and her wishes. So really, I hadn't asked for the renovation specifically, but rather as a sub-element in my ask to be with her to support her. So that set me to thinking about specific asks versus broader asks, which took me on quite a journey, which I sat with and discussed with Hojo over the following weeks, hence his suggestion that I give this talk. And if you'll bear with me, that's what I would like to examine with you today. And before I go further, I want to clarify terms a bit. I'm going to use the word asking because that was the phrase that Hojo mentioned. I asked for it. And asking could mean like asking a question, but asking for something is different. You could think of it as wanting something combined with taking an action to obtain what you want. And that's the sense that I'll be using today when I'm talking about asking. So if you're asking for something from someone else, from the universe, of yourself, you're setting up the expectation to receive something. And as Buddhists, you can probably see what is coming. if we're setting up expectations by asking for something, we're also setting ourselves up for dissatisfaction, for disappointment, for dukkha. And what did I want to receive in this renovation example that I mentioned? Well, a better house or a happier wife. For me, the answer was not simply a digital, well, all one and none the other, but more a blend of both, which was clearly heavily weighted towards the happy wife side. And what's the difference, you might ask? Well, for me, this was the tip of the wedge of some deep examination. The distinction, as I see it, is on the level of specificity. The house renovation is a more specific ask of life than a happy wife. More specific in that it is more highly defined with less room for flexibility. And increasingly, I'm coming to find that I'm happier when my asks are on a high, broad level. The more specific they are, the more problematic they tend to be. To give another recent example, I could ask that I get my children and my grandchildren all together at the same time in one place for 1 week at the beach this summer. I would dearly love to do this, but it is asking many aspects of the universe to bend to my will, from everyone changing their schedule to accommodate this, to everyone being healthy at the same time, which is challenging with young children, to being able to find and reserve a beachfront house on short notice, which is nearly impossible, even having everyone think this would be a good idea. In fact, when I told my daughter I was thinking about this, but was realizing it was not feasible, she said, "Well, Dad, to be honest, having my three boys at the beach would not be a relaxing vacation for me." And if you knew these three boys, you'd understand that immediately. Um, and then when I asked my son, my middle son with two twin girls, he said, "Well, we're really not beach people, and they have all kinds of animals at home. They love animals, and it's really hard for them to arrange care for those animals for them to go somewhere. They're homebodies because of that, and that's great for them." Um, so in short, this idea was doomed to failure from the start and would generate enormous frustration all around if I tried to force it into becoming a reality. On the other hand, if my ask is to spend quality time with my children and grandchildren as reasonable for all parties, I'm more open to lots of possibilities with lots of flexibility and low frustration. Then a last minute request for babysitting for my daughter is an opportunity rather than a chore, and a blessing to them rather than a burden. And that happens frequently. She has a lot of job conflicts, and with three boys, she's got a lot going on. So I get regular phone calls, "Dad, can you come?" And it's like, "Yes, that's what I'm here for." And for my son, who's a little bit farther away, they can't quite do that. But I'll call and say, "Hey, I'm open tomorrow. Or are you guys open tomorrow?" And shortly after that call with Sensei, we did that, and I took my son and his family out to lunch, and we just had a delightful time. So those two examples, in my mind, um, make the case that a broader ask improves our chance for happiness by loosening and broadening our expectations. So now I consider those positive examples, looking at it from the positive side, right? Let me give a counterexample from the dark side, from the opposite direction, how grasping really concretely leads to dukkha. Going back to this renovation project, which, as I had said before, can be highly frustrating. Midway through the project, a couple of weeks ago, the project manager informed us about a disappointing change in what we had been told to expect. I got all huffy with righteous indignation and started spouting off about, "Well, you promised A, and midterm you're changing to deliver B," and so on. I was rude, made a fool of myself, and accomplished nothing. Part of my knee-jerk response was a general, "I'm the customer and the customer is always right" attitude, mixed with a good portion of defensiveness on my wife's behalf because my wife was really excited about this particular aspect of the project, and it wasn't going to happen that way. Back to me wanting to support her wishes. But regardless of, and I'm not saying that to make excuses, That was just what was going on in my head when I was not as aware as I would like to be and just reacting instead of thinking and responding appropriately. And the result was that the reality was what it was, and that wasn't going to change. And I was making matters worse by expecting to change the universe and fussing about it. And sadly, my wife was even less happy because not only was she not going to get exactly what she was hoping for, but she was rightly disappointed in my behavior. So I'd actually, my grasping had made things a bit worse. And that was all because I was so bound up in a very specific, tightly grasping ask for what I thought the universe should deliver to me and us. So that brings up another point then, in that to me, whenever we ask for something, we almost never know fully what receipt of that something will entail, as there's always some level of uncertainty, ambiguity, and risk in terms of not getting what we want whenever we engage with anything. So now back to, this arose in a Dokusan discussion. So this is about the point in Dokusan when Hojo typically asks, what has this got to do with Zen? Which is a relevant and key question in Dokusan. And as anybody who does the same thing repeatedly, we have our patterns. And my typical reply is, what does not have to do with Zen? Which I think is a perfectly valid reply with a big if you're examining your life thoroughly through the lens of practice. I tend to take our Dokusan topics and throughout the week I sit with them. I try to observe those topics playing out in my daily life and actions and see how the Dharma teachings relate to them, and then discuss them again in Dokusan in a continuous iterative cycle. In that manner, my understanding on this topic deepened over the following weeks and months. So to get back to the point about asking, as Buddhists, we know that we cannot ask for a singular thing, person, item, or situation, that such a clear-cut definition is an illusion, that anything is intermingled with so many others. We can't know for sure what we are getting into. So given the above risks and warnings around asking for anything, do I really want to ask for anything? Um, so the point I want to make, in my corporate world, they always said, think about talks and presentations with what's the main point you want people to take away from it, right? So if you forget everything else, this is the one point I would hope that you remember from this talk is my premise is that the less you ask for, the more you receive. Okay. And I think our practice makes this clear. If we define an ask, we're also setting up criteria for what the satisfactory response is, which is, in other words, just a filter for rejecting everything else, not being open to receiving something else. To me, this is a recipe for disappointment, dissatisfaction, dukkha. So if you accept that premise, what can we do? And I think there are two possibilities. First, as I've alluded to, is to shift our ask, to loosen it, to broaden it from what we want to receive, which we have no control over, to more, well, what do we want to do, which we do have more control over? Shifting focus from ourselves to others. And looking at my focus items in the above examples, well, what I really wanted to focus on were people, my wife, my children, my grandchildren. I wanted to have, everybody to be together, be happy, have a good time, focusing on their happiness. And it doesn't take much extension to expand that to may all beings be free. And this should sound familiar, right? Sounds like the Bodhisattva vow. So for me, this process of looking at how tightly I asked for things, how loosening up the ask actually meant I received more, how shifting my focus from things to people and receiving to giving of my time and efforts leads to more happiness. All this leads me towards the answer being living by vow, specifically the Bodhisattva vow. And some of you may be familiar with, actually, I've got it here, this book, Living by Vow by Shohak Okamura. Um, it's a delightful book. I highly recommend it. And in the very introduction, he said something that just struck me like a hammer blow. He gives a definition of a bodhisattva. He says, ordinary people are those who live being pulled by their karma. Bodhisattvas are those who live led by their vows. And to me, the examples I gave of trying to ask for very specific things was a prime case of generating karmic entanglements and all the accompanying frustrations, while relaxing into looking what others needed and what I could do for them led me towards living by vow. So, I had said, well, I think there are two responses to the conundrum of asking for things, wanting things. The first was this moving towards living by vow, and the second is not asking at all. Asking and receiving require, by definition, a separation, a distinction between asker and what is being asked for. Therefore, this concept resides in the realm of form in Zen parlance. We just chanted the Heart Sutra. Um, from that perspective, it is also and simultaneously true that there is nothing to ask for and no one to ask, right? And then if we ask for nothing at all, then there's no filter. Then everything we receive, every moment we live, is an unexpected gift. And my family know that I'm a soft touch. I cry at anything, and there are moments when I truly deeply feel this and can come to tears with gratitude. The more I let go of my ego and relax into that non-separation and living by vow, the happier I am. So, in closing, now that I've discussed at length the sins of asking, I'm going to ask you something. I ask you to examine for yourself. What are you asking for? Can you relax and broaden the ask a little bit? How could you shift a bit from the external focus of receiving things to an internal focus of living by vow? How could you practice letting go of asking at all? And I think that's all I have to say about that. Thank you for letting me share this time with you. And
Let
to
me
have
jump in. Let me ask you to do two. Oh.
No, I already said I'm done. That's it.
Explain a little bit more about Dokusan and also try to articulate the vow. We have some newcomers here who probably don't know what vow you're speaking of,
Okay.
what it says or means.
Okay. So a couple things. I touched very briefly on several things related here. I think I talked about Dokusan. That's a discussion between teacher and student, looking at, I don't know the formal definition, but I see it as discussing your practice and how to apply your practice effectively, and how that applies to,
Sometimes expressed as the great matter.
yes, the great matter. So that's why he asked, how does this relate to Zen? And I think my point, I made this because in my mind it's pivotal, and it took me some while to realize this as Hojo kept asking that question. That was his genius of just keep asking the question until I get it. That everything relates if um, you're kind of working with it through multiple, we have an eightfold path, right? Not a one-fold path. The aspects of, like we're doing right now, working together as Sangha, examining the teachings, sitting in meditation, dokusan with the teacher, all these kinds of things all worked together in my examples of helping me deepen my understanding around this point. And Dokusan is a key aspect of that for me, and I highly recommend it if you haven't tried it. Hojo, is that kind of what you were looking for in terms of my
Yes,
explanation?
very much. But
Okay.
on the meaning of the Bodhisattva vow, we chanted the four great vows this morning, of course. But I would like to ask you to engage in paraphrasing, which I'm encouraging everybody to try to say these things in their own words rather than recite, how we've learned to
Mhm.
say it. How would you paraphrase the Bodhisattva vow?
Oh, wow. It's funny. I have gone through that exercising of paraphrasing various things. I have not paraphrased that one just because for me, I don't know, it works as is. I haven't had to paraphrase that one, but we've chanted it. And I think each stanza is a reminder of what's important to focus on, right? Beings are numberless. To focus not on me, what I want, but the others, everybody else. Um, and then delusions, in Genjo Koan, there's this beautiful passage that I can never remember correctly that said, you know, um, sentient beings are greatly deluded about enlightenment. Enlightened beings or Buddhas have a great understanding of delusion, focusing on what are my delusions. And that's why I gave the negative example of, yes, I got wrapped up in my ego delusion and I just am suffering for it because I feel so bad that I did that. Um, Focusing on your delusions is a continual reminder of what we need to do. Dharma gates are boundless, meaning that there are lots and lots of opportunities. We don't have to, it's not just a question of sitting and meditating and reading a book, even a wonderful book like Living by Vow. Um, but um, everything in our life, if we examine it through the lens of practice, is an opportunity for deeper understanding. It is a Dharma gate. And the Buddha way is unsurpassable, meaning it's unsurpassable, but it's never ending. You're not done. It's every day, every moment. Kind of that's not a I failed in the ask. Was not a brief summarization or a paraphrase. That was an expansion. I'm sorry. That's just the way I am.
That was perfect. Well, not perfect, but close.
Good enough.
So, John, why don't you take over and see if there's a comment or question online, and we'll take turns and go in-house, online, in-house, online.
If you do have a comment, you could raise your hand like Kushin, or you could put a digital hand on the screen, or you could put a question in the chat box. Why don't we start with Koshin?
Thank you all. Thank you, Kosetsu Sensei, for a lovely talk. And if you will, I will just share some personal experience along that same realm that came up as you went through your discussion. I have had the great privilege of spending a lot of time in the out of doors in the wilderness areas, and that's sort of my go-to and has been from the very get-go. And one of our adages that we've learned over the years is there's no such thing as bad weather, there's just bad preparation. And I'd like to unfold that into what you're talking about because it struck me in the same way. When we go out to do whatever we're doing, whatever the season is, we can get caught up in not having all the equipment, not having the right attitude, not having enough of this or that, and we expect so much from where we're going. But every time I find that I've let that go and stopped worrying about what that experience may become, as you said earlier, if you stop asking, you receive more. Because then we're not building these expectations, as you clearly say. And this, I'm relating this to practice in the same sense. If we go to the cushion with an expectation, this will be the day I'm going to pop through and awaken and everything's going to be glorious. Well, of course, more than likely, the very opposite will happen and we'll find greater suffering because of our self that we're incorporating rather than selflessness or asking for nothing and receiving everything. And this gets back to our premise from Shakyamuni himself that our Buddha nature is already here. It's what we have to do to get out of the way to clear the space to receive all the blessings that already exist. So I'll stop chattering away, but I love for me, just the connection of when I practice in nature or I practice on the cushion, the same understanding of release rather than constriction, asking for nothing and allowing the gain to be expressed in the full opportunity of seeing for the first time, if you will. So thank you again for your talk, delightful, and I think it both speaks to our personal needs and also our personal practice, and I love how you combine the two. Gasho.
Thank you so much. There are a few things there I'd like to respond to. First of all, I'm so glad that my personal story helped you find something in your life to resonate with. That's what I hope to do. I don't like hypotheticals, you know, if I tell a story from my life, I know it's true for me, and then I assume that or hope that others will find a resonance with, yes, I had a similar situation. So I'm glad to hear that. As a fellow outdoor enthusiast, Hojo probably is guessing what's coming. I am very fond of, and to your point about making use of what you've got, many times I've found a lovely spot and I've unlaced my hiking boots and used my hiking boots as kind of a cushion. You know, I sit up on the hiking boots and sit out in nature. And you know, I would like to stress for anybody and everybody that meditation doesn't have to happen on a zafu in a meditation hall. It can happen anywhere and everywhere, and nature is a really good, I think, place for doing that. It worked for the Buddha. Um, and then finally, Kushin, your reminder that we need to apply this not asking for anything also on the cushion in our practice. You know, it's grasping just makes it that much farther away. Thank you.
Okay, in-house. Anybody have a comment or question that I can bring up? Don't be shy.
Uh, Thank you very much.
Step to the mic a little bit so you're a little better on camera.
Okay. You know, see or hear me, if you want me to see or hear.
Can't hide behind the column.
Okay. Thank you. Your talk is speaking directly at me at this moment. That's really phenomenal, and thank you. Um, I'm struggling to reconcile something or concept. You talked repeatedly about other. I find the Zen practice exceptionally, exceedingly me focused, and all about me, and all about, you know, my interior, my life, my me is what it feels like, and I can't quite pull those together in the way you've presented things. I don't know. Unpack that if you don't mind. So.
Certainly. I was just waiting to give you the opportunity to say any more if you wanted to. Yes, it is one of those conundrums, kind of a paradox that, you know, another wonderful quote is, I think this was also Dogen, to study the way is to study the self, right? We talk about letting go of the self, but we can't really let go of it until we see what a delusion it is, right? We have to study the self first. It's going to be a self-centered practice for a while, I think. Again, a real life example, you know, and I think some people, you know, will resonate with this if you live long enough. A lot of us go through this. When I was going through my divorce, um, I was sitting on the cushion, and there were many tears on the cushion. I mentioned earlier, I cry easily. It is like, oh, and it starts off with, why does this happen to me? You know, poor pitiful me. She did this to me, and it's all about me. And eventually, you know, if you sit with anything long enough, and when I say sit with, I don't mean it intentionally. I'm going to sit and think about this thing, but no, doing zazen properly, trying to empty your mind, but then thoughts come and you observe what comes and let go of it and observe and let go and observe and let go over and over and over and again. And after about, 10,000 times of the poor pitiful me story, you start realizing that, yeah, this is just ego grasping. This is just a delusion. And I came to the point eventually where I could start thinking about my soon to be ex-wife. It's like, wow, what's this like? This is rough for me. What's this like for her? And why, what motivated her? What was life with me like that this is better than being with me? And it, I guess what I'm trying to say is I think this relates to your question is I had to spend some time getting over me to be able to think about others. And I think that's a key part of our practice. To study the way is to study the self, right? And to be greatly aware of our own delusions allows us to then truly think about others, feel others' situations and suffering, and be able to shift our focus to them. Does that help at all?
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, online, John?
Anyone else have a comment, a thought, question? We have a hand up from Brian.
First of all, Cosette, thank you for the talk. When you asked if anybody can identify with it, I can identify it with most days, the exact frustration that you have, whether it's renovation or something else, right? The expectations. And I think I was thinking about the Bodhisattva vow. I got a little nervous when Sensei asked you to summarize that or to put that in your own words, because I always thought of the Bodhisattva vow as to sort of putting other people before yourself, right? The first line kind of, beings are numberless, I vow to save them. And I think your talk was like this perfect illustration of Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. And this idea that delusions are inexhaustible, and this whole idea that things are going to turn out the way that I want them to. I have expectations, I have a certain desire. I always say this phrase to myself, which is very similar to you asked for it. And the phrase is, we're always doing exactly what we want to do. Right? I mean, we may be doing something that we don't want to do, but it beats all the other alternatives, or we wouldn't be doing it. Right? I mean, it's true. I mean, maybe we're deluded in our want or our ask, right? But the wanting in that sentence is the second noble truth, right? I mean, that's where it comes from. The dissatisfaction is caused by wanting. So if we are doing exactly what we want to do all the time, that in itself is dissatisfaction. I was thinking about that term while you were talking, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. The less you ask for, the more you receive. And I'm like, is that like an uncoupling of that phrase? Like, we are always doing, and then like ... what we want to do. And maybe that's the uncoupling. Maybe that's just we're always doing. And what we want to do is extra. Maybe that's the piece that causes suffering. And kind of back to what you were saying about how it's sort of a selfish practice in the beginning. I mean, I think to sit long enough, not to drop self and all that, but I think you start sitting long enough and you begin to see the other pieces of the Bodhisattva vow, right? The delusions are inexhaustible. Well, they certainly are in my life, right? And Dharma gates are boundless. Well, yeah, they are when you become aware of them, when you become aware of the frustration that comes with that, which is the whole story that you just told, right? I mean, like, this awareness begins to build, and then the opportunity to see these delusions clearly begins to build, begins to build, begins to build. And then it becomes this, or I won't say for me, I will say, I can't imagine, it becomes a feedback loop where you start to see that you see the problem. And then you see that other people have the same problem. And then you have some compassion, because then you start to see that there is a way out of this, or you start to see, maybe it's not a way out of this, it's a way to see through it. So I don't know. This is, as you're talking, this is my page of notes, right? It's like arrow over here, no over there, no over there, and there's like 10 things I want to draw together, and that what I just said doesn't really draw any of them together, and I'm not even going to try because it wouldn't be understandable, and hopefully a little bit of that was, but I just really appreciate it. I appreciate the vulnerability more than anything else, because I think that's what I connect with, right? When people tell stories from their lives, and they aren't perfect stories, they're just like, I realized this, and then I realized this, and then wow, that was really bad, and then you're like, yeah, thank you, yes. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments and your openness. Um, and I think, you and I are similar in many ways in that, we weren't necessarily paraphrasing specific gathas or passages, but I think you and I were both kind of with my, the less I ask for, the more I receive. When you're like, whatever we're doing is exactly what we want to. I'm not saying it properly, but, we are taking the teachings, these ancient but true teachings, but often come to us through medieval Japanese mindset, and parsing it and translating it for ourselves. And when we do that, then we feel it in our bones. And to Hojo's point about paraphrasing these, I think that's an extremely valuable exercise, and it's a real kind of it's just very valuable for us to do, to keep sitting with it and working with it until it clicks for us. And then that phrase in medieval Japanese, it makes more sense.
Okay, thanks. I have one quick comment on that, and then we have a comment in the room here. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions inexhaustible, vow to end them. Diamond gates and boundless, vow to enter them. So you could say, delusions are inexhaustible, and I vow to end them. And therefore, diamond gates are boundless because delusions are inexhaustible.
Yeah.
That one in the room.
Yeah.
Introduce yourself.
Hey, how you doing? Kosetsu. Nelson. Kosetsu. Absolutely appreciated the talk. This is something that I've been contemplating a bit myself. Just, what am I asking for and ask. So it felt like the talk was a well-timed gift. So thank you for that. My question is, I think in life we have different events or different things that we work towards, call them goals, if you will. For instance, your retirement home that you're in right now. And I think I wanted to know, how do you reconcile working towards these goals with the idea of asking for nothing and expecting everything? Are these goals delusions? Are these goals asks themselves? So how do you like reconcile? How do you keep those? What was that balance of working towards something, but also not asking for anything and expecting anything that comes?
Wow, don't pull any punches. Don't ask easy questions, No, that's one that we all struggle with. And I reconcile that with a couple of things, and that sounds kind of like sophistry. I reconcile it. But what is your objective, like with the house? Is it that I want to have the nicest house on the block, and show my neighbors? Or is it that, I want to have a place where children and grandchildren can come and we can be together, and I'm trying to make it, what do they call it? Aging in place friendly, so I'm not, a burden to my children for as long as possible, so that I have wheelchair access and things like that. I feel like I'm doing a terrible job of answering this, but it's just setting a direction rather than a defined objective. And are those directions, what is your intention? Is your intention towards self, satisfying yourself, or helping with your relationship with others, and fulfilling the bodhisattva vow? And it can be, it's usually, it's not a digital answer. It's either this or that. It's a blend, and it has to do with your intention and how tightly you're holding on to it. That's a good one for me, is like, whenever I've set plans, I've always joked that throughout my career, whenever I set an objective to get this job or do this or whatever, I could usually achieve it, except not exactly what I thought starting out. So being, and Hojo is probably thinking of a phrase that I've used many, many, many times, of being comfortable with ambiguity, meaning you can set a general direction, but not necessarily a precise destination, right? And being motivated more by living harmoniously with others and helping others. I think it's fine to have goals and directions with those in mind. It's are your goals dealing with yourself, or is it yourself in service to others? If you're trying to, you're young, working in your career, are you striving for a promotion for the prestige and the power, or that so that you can securely take care of your family, and be a mentor to those that you work, that you're senior to. You see what I'm saying? It's all
Yeah.
about motivation. I hope that helped. I feel like it was
No,
kind of vague.
absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, back online.
I believe the next one in line is Shiryo. And we also have a hand up from Joseph.
I think Joseph has precedence here. He raised his hand earlier.
I appreciate that, Ashirio. Look, I hopefully I'll be very brief. I
That was brief.
Oh, can you guys hear me okay? Sorry. Yeah, all right.
Yes.
Is that a little better? Okay. I guess I really just wanted to say, hopefully I'll be brief, but just I really enjoyed this theme of questions, and I think I guess I'll just say maybe these are philosophical points, but a question is already sharply intentional. It has a goal, but yet I think the dharmic thing is not to ask other people why, like not to constantly demand that they justify and explain every decision in relation that they ultimately can't account for. And, I guess just like children love to ask why because it places this huge burden of explanation on everyone around them. And like, I guess it's that, like when you're asking, you're demanding other people confabulate this whole explanation for why your situation is the way it is. And in some ways, I guess that's it. It's like the structure of the question matters. If you're asking like, how much is of this is, that's a more narrow pragmatic thing. But when you're asking this big why and what does it mean and why is this all happening to me? Like, yeah, that's not the right level of abstraction to get an answer. And I guess just one kind of puzzle here would be like, you can ask a question, but you can't say always what problems that question is responding to. And so sometimes you need to ask no question to get an answer about what your real problem is. And anyway, I guess the final point would be about independent thought and having goals. And like part of the point of Zen and personal transformation seems to me about helping people move away from dependent mindsets where they're always getting their directionality from others and forming some interiority, some ability to formalize and express their own singularity, their own intentions that are going to be sharp because they proceed from embodied organic struggles and problems. Anyway, sorry, this is all too intense, but hopefully you get the sense of what I'm saying.
Right. Thank you for your question. Just to try and briefly address that. I had mentioned that when I was hiring people, often my requirement would be that they have to be comfortable with ambiguity. Again, Hojo has heard that in Dokusan many times over the years. A physicist that I greatly respect, Richard Feynman, has a famous quote where he says, "I would much prefer questions that can't be answered to answers that can't be questioned." Right. I think it's perfectly fine, and I don't think you were disagreeing with this, to ask questions as long as you're more focused on the value of the questioning process than obtaining an answer, a specific answer. And I hope I'm not speaking for you. But yeah, and I think Stephen Batchelor, oh, thank you for the thumbs up there. Stephen Batchelor in his books talks a lot about in his, I think he was sitting in Korean zendos. They would sit with the question, what is this right now? What is this experience right now, this moment, right? So again, and tying into kind of like the direction, if you're asking questions with an answer in mind, any of us who have done research knows that that kind of biases your results and your filters. But if you just question openly, it can be very surprising what you receive. And I think that's what our practice does, is it encourages us to practice to question openly. Thank you.
Yeah, before we jump to the Shiri organ, we have one in-house.
I'm Alexa, and when you started out talking about your project and the frustration and disappointment of not being able to control everything, reminded me of there's another group that I belong to, and one of their favorite sayings is that expectations are resentments in the making. And I thought about that. I thought, well, why can't we have expectations? Looking forward to the kids at the beach or whatever it is. Not going to Six Flags, but definitely. And I thought, well, how do you solve that in your head? To be able to have expectations, which is a very human way to look at things. And it just came to the solution for me was really almost a grammatical thing. It's like, why not look at it as a possibility than an expectation? Because inside that word is the possibility that it may happen or it may not happen. And if you keep your expectation at that level, you say, and that's also losing control. Just say, okay, I'm just going to say there's a possibility here of this happy thing that you want to do, or it may not happen. And if I look at it that way, I don't build resentment. And I think it just didn't happen. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or not, especially with your project.
Oh boy. Yes. Expectations were resentments waiting to happen.
Yeah.
And that's another way to express, what happened with this one particular little glitch. So that's a lovely saying in terms of helping us to be aware of the dangers of expectations. I love what you said about looking at it more in terms of a possibility. To me, that's kind of very resonant with what I was saying about broadening our asks, right? Not being so specific. And expectations a very specific idea in our heads that we have, whereas reality's almost 100% not going to give us exactly what we had in our head. And oh, by the way, if it does, we keep changing that expectation. Again, that's human nature as well. So it's kind of an endless trap. But I think you're on the right track of looking at that. Well, that's one possibility.
There's also the possibility that it might turn out better than you expected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Never happens, but there's the possibility.
Well, Shiryu's been very patient here. I think it's his turn.
Thank you, Kosetsu. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I'm going through two layers of electronics here. I've been trying to practice patience, and I think now I'm fifth questioner, which is such an improvement over the last 2 years. I am also going through some home renovations, and what does that have to do with Zen? One of the things that the book will tell you is be quite specific with your contractor. Don't expect your contractor to be able to read your mind. And I found not knowing the particulars of your situation and not wanting to go there. We are in a similar situation based on the idea, well, we gave you the measurements for the marble. And the piece of marble that you cut isn't the piece of marble that we asked for. So now it's going to be another 3 weeks before that piece of marble is in, and I have a decent place to chop up my vegetables. And it didn't make me angry, but I did have an expectation, which now we see as frustration. But there, rather than getting angry, well, getting angry isn't going to help the piece of marble to be cut in the right shape. So how do we transcend craving and anger and all of these other things to do what needs to be done? And that's my question. And then the other, I was also writing down quotations. The first one that occurred to me was if I went before Sensei and he said, "You asked for it," I would imagine myself sitting in front of Sensei Super Chicken, who would have said, "You knew the job was dangerous when you took it." And I don't know who was the original author of this, but it is also related to home repairs. Is blessed are those who ask for nothing, for they shall not be disappointed. So I question in the relative world, there are tasks to be done. And how do we set those so that the things that need to be done do get done, and the things that don't need to be done, or the things that we may desperately we think that we need to seek and to have and to reach, we can make it. How do we make the difference between those two?
Okay. So yet again, not throwing me any softballs here. Um, can I sign up for Easy Sunday next time? Um,
There are no easy Sundays here.
um, so when we chant, form is emptiness and emptiness is form, we can't just go into emptiness and dwell there, right? We have to live in the daily world. We are individuals in that sense. We do have responsibilities. We do have tasks to perform. We do have projects. We do have jobs and bills and so on and so forth. Um, and you mentioned anybody who's worked with the contractors knows that you need to be as specific as possible, and that's a general project management principle of specificity is good. But I think that needs to be coupled with flexibility. In that, who was it? Eisenhower said after World War II that plans are worthless, but planning is essential, right? And planning means, setting your intention, thinking about possibilities, um, and preparing and things like that. But also with the mindset of, well, as soon as we hit the battlefield, or in our case, just hitting reality, the, a lot of that's going to change. And if we are attached to our plans and the outcome we had desired, then that's going to lead to a lot of frustration. If we approach it with, well, I'm setting this direction and I'm preparing as much as I can, but I'm also going to go with adapting to reality moment by moment. I think that is the where the difference lies between frustration and satisfaction with the end results. Knowing going in that the end result is not going to be exactly what I envision now. If we've set our intention properly meaning, with the right kind of focus, uh, then we're likely to still, have some significant level of satisfaction coming out of it, that we have done good for self and others. Um, Understanding that there are going to be glitches and bumps and changes in plan as we go along. To me, that's kind of the middle road between the form of I've planned it this way and I want it to work out exactly that way, and the emptiness of, well, why bother? You know, we have to live in between. And to me, that flexibility and adaptability and responding in the moment is the key. That's my answer for what it's worth. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one quick comment on that before we move on. The contrast between plan and planning, I think, brings up a kind of a fundamental Zen principle Master Dogen was famous for. He was known for using nouns as verbs and so forth. He would play with the language so you could see the dynamic reality underlying what seemed to be a static reality. And so, life is a verb, not a noun. If you look at plan, plan is a noun. Planning is the gerund form of a noun, which is a verb form of the noun. And that's the emphasis on process, the emphasis on change, impermanence, imperfection, etc., that Zen faces up to. So I think that's a very important underlying principle with this as a case example. So in-house here. Here we go. Do you have another?
No, I think that's just.
You're just trying to.
Hello, I'm Ura. I guess I have two comments, but they are connected and about the talk and everything. So one of them is about when one of the fellow Sangha members was talking about how this sometimes meditation and Zen is like so me focused, and you mentioned the Dogen quote about how to study the way is to study the self, and we're discussing I guess the ways that you can from that you can move on, and and it made me remember that the full quote that followed after that also helps like elucidate some of what you were saying, and I went to the out of the room to get my phone for a moment because I actually have the quote written in my phone because I think it's wonderful.
Mhm.
And Master Dogen said that to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be verified by all things, and to be verified by all things is to let the body and mind of the self and the body and mind of others drop off. And I think that it's it's one of my I love that quote, and maybe it's wrong to say one of my favorite quotes because that would involve a sense of preference, and so it gets complicated, but I think it's a great quote to kind of like to think about when practicing and studying, and in a way about this topic of like asking and wanting. It also makes me think about, like, this is my second comment about I'm from a physics background, so I always think about when discussing things like interconnectedness, I think about this famous Carl Sagan quote about how, it, I guess to paraphrase it a little bit, it's like if you want to bake an apple pie, you first need the whole universe.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it's like it wasn't meant to be like a Buddhist or Zen quote or anything like that, but it really, I think it's a great way to think about how even something as simple as wanting, like, and I think the quote also fits because there's an element of wanting an apple pie. So and yeah, so like if you want to make an apple pie, you need you need everything. You need that all of the atoms, all of the the atoms that make up the molecules, and the molecules that make up the plant, and all of these processes need to come together for something as simple as a pie. And even something as simple as that has requires so many different things. So when we ask for things, we really need to open up to what other interconnected things, need to come together for what we are asking for. And I think that, your talk really brings all of this to mind when, as I was thinking about like your words and everything. And so I don't know if there's anything that you want to add to it, but I just wanted to, I guess, share my thought process.
It's a big cookbook.
Yeah.
The Carl Sagan cookbook, The Universe, right?
Yeah.
So first of all, I forgot your name, but can you tell me again?
Ura.
Ura. So Ura, thank you so much. Because I realized that I had forgotten the second part of the quote, and you brought that back up, Dogen's quote, that the first part, to study the way is to study the self, is incomplete without the next part, to study the self is to forget the self. And I had failed to kind of mention that. I could use the excuse for the sake of brevity, but whatever. So thank you so much for bringing that up. It is one of my favorite quotes. I don't think it's, when I say favorite, to me that means that's the one that resonates with me. And when you find something that resonates with you, it's worth kind of digging a little bit more. It's like, why does that resonate with you? And then work on others, as we talked about, Brian and some of the others. We worked at, well, how do we find what resonates with us, and then see what quotes, what teachings fit with that resonance. I think that's very important to identify, well, why is it resonating? So I think it's fair to say this is a favorite quote or not, and not necessarily a preference to worry about. Thank you for bringing up Carl Sagan. I love Carl Sagan. I don't know his religious preferences, but I do feel like I have felt in the past that he was kind of a Buddhist at heart, in terms of he had a deeply innate sense of the interconnectedness of all things from those kinds of quotes. And I know exactly that one you were talking about, to create an apple, to bake an apple pie, first you have to create the universe.
There's a line from one of the Chan poems that I think may clarify this preference we have for some of the sayings over the others. It says, darkness merges refined and common words. Brightness distinguishes clear and murky phrases. So when there's a clear phrase like that, we recognize it. Naturally, you're going to prefer that to a murky phrase. A lot of the teachings are murky. Somebody was raising their hand online, looked like, flailing about there.
Teshin has his hand up.
The point that was made earlier about how do you rectify having a goal like wanting a home over your head, roof over your head, and setting down goals. It seems like, if nothing else, that lends a sense of humility, because every square foot that I occupy with my dwelling is a square foot that no other plant or animal can occupy. So if nothing else, it leads towards humility, that we are actually here at the expense of others.
Thank you. In my rephrasing of the Meal Gatha, it sounds brutal when I say it, but the way I rephrased it was, life consumes life. Therefore, for me to exist, something else must die. And it sounds extremely brutal, but it's exactly, in my mind, that kind of a point of, there are limited resources and we are consuming resources, and we need to be mindful of that. When I was working with college students, and I think, Tashin, you've done this as well, right? Chaplaincy at a university. They love questions, and they love hypotheticals, and they love this and that, and they love a little bit of virtue signaling. Well, I only drink almond milk. I don't, have people mistreat cows. And then I talk about, well, let's talk about the water resource consumption used for almond milk, and the people that need that water, and the point being not to harass them about almond milk, but to make the point that anything that we do consumes resources. So, I've joked that, instead of being a vegetarian or this or that, I'm a resourcitarian, right? I try to minimize my consumption of resources. And I think you make a really good point that if you look at it that way in terms of the resources that we consume, that can give us a healthy dose of humility if we look at it that way. Thank you.
So anyone else in house? Yes, please step forward. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Christina.
Hi.
One of the things that's been sticking with me is the like things you were saying around vows. So I'm recently engaged to Nelson. So we are, I guess, about to be in the process of planning a wedding. And when you talked about what you were doing for your wife, like a lot of your center came back to, um, I guess, like your vows or your promises for family. So out of curiosity, like were your vows, I guess, at your wedding, if you had one, like, were they informed by principles of like your spirituality, or did you all write your own vows? And just trying to reconcile, like, I guess, as you talked about them, they feel weighty, like um, the center point that you always go back to make sure that you're on the right path. So as I continue to think about our future together, just curious what that looks like and what that means for you.
Okay. This answer may be a little bit disappointing.
No expectations.
My wife and I will spare you the long story behind it. We were living in Switzerland, so we got married in the Gemeinde, which is German for town hall. It was a civil ceremony, um, and it had to be performed to be legal. It had to be performed in one of the local legal languages in Switzerland, so that we were in the German-speaking region. So it was in German, and they deemed that my German was good enough, but hers was not. So they had to have a translator there to make sure she wasn't getting married under false pretenses. And um, uh, the they had, even though it was a civil ceremony, there was a lovely metaphor that they used of two streams coming together in a forest to join and form a larger stream, weave through the forest. And I have so often wished that I could go back and find that passage. Um, so we didn't take vows in the traditional sense. It was a civil ceremony. You guys want to get married? Okay, you're married. Um, and they had the kind of that lovely little story, but there weren't any vows as a part of it. We didn't write our own, other than to say that my wife and I are kind of continually writing them. We discuss what we want to do, how we want to interact with family and others very frequently. I think Hojo may recall, he certainly heard me say this many times, that one of the things that I love about my wife is that she is a perfect mirror. I, I can get away with no BS with her. She she reflects my BS very clearly back to me. Um, and but I think and life changes. So I think vows is a static thing. I'm not going to argue with him, but I'm going to say that there probably is a need for continuing re-examination and rededication. Well, and that's what we do all the time. We chant the vows every time we get together. And so I guess that's what I would say about it. Ours were not set at the initial ceremony, but we continually keep examining ourselves. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? Who are we doing it for? And why?
Thank you.
I hope that helped.
Just a comment on that. We should understand a vow is like an open-ended thing. It's like an aspiration. It's not an expectation. In a sense, we don't know what it is. I vow to free all beings. What does that mean? And where do you start? How long is it going to be? And we start at home, of course. But so I've done several weddings. Some have worked out great. Some haven't worked out so well, including mine. But the vow, I think, is very similar. It needs to be more like I take up the way of, not killing. We don't say I will never kill. It's impossible. I take up the way of this, or take up the way of it, affirm life, do not kill. So it's a positive side and a prohibitive side. I think you think wedding vow is very similar to that. I will continue trying my best to whatever the vow is. No guarantees.
So I just want to
You're
say I
lucky
wish you
dog.
both a wonderful life and congratulations.
Yep. That's a built-in societal bias right there. So anybody else online?
I have a question that I've been
Uh-oh.
sitting here with. Cosetsu, it's not in line. It doesn't feel like it's in line with the other questioning, but yet it feels right. For the last few years, I've noticed individuals like yourself ending their names with pronouns. And I have some vague sense that this is affirming something related to gender or something. But respectfully, as we're wrapping up, would you mind sharing with me where I'm a little older than you,
Oh no,
but
please. Thank you. Thank you for asking that question. So my last, oh gosh, 10 years in the working world were very, very much in the technology realm, online, a lot of virtual engagements. So you lose a lot of body language, you lose a lot of context. You don't know more than what you see on the screen, right? So there are various ways that you use to kind of give additional context to help be welcoming and things like that. And as we have entered the realm where, you know, current governments and all aside, that we are more open to greater flexibility in gender identity, and enabling people to identify themselves as they wish to. Um, and there is not a set, there are, to my knowledge, there are not set gender neutral pronouns in English, and there are various sets in use. Um, and so this allows people to choose how they want um, to present themselves and their gender identity. And the reason I do that is not that I particularly want to express any gender identity. What I do this because I am hopefully expressing that I am very comfortable with people doing this, and I'm encouraging them to express their gender identity that way if they choose to do so. Does that make sense?
so by being present this morning with us, I'm listening and wanting to understand. Uh, and thank you for this. What you're communicating to all of us in this room, virtual and otherwise, is that you're very comfortable with us expressing our gender identity, whatever it is,
Mhm.
openly. Is that what you just said?
And that I want to respect that. So if I wanted to refer to someone, oh gosh, this is asking me to remember grammar and like the third person something or other. I don't know. Should I use he, she, they, she, or some of the others? You know, I don't know, but I would try to respect that if it's on the screen and I remember to do so. This touches on a topic that I emailed with Hojo and some others recently on a separate thread where when I took my vows and when I was serving as a chaplain at North Carolina State University, um, I take that very, very seriously. I wanted to be open to everybody. And Duncan was at that time in Scouts, and at the Scout meetings and various functions, they would recite the Pledge of Allegiance. And I intentionally did not recite the pledge because I felt like me saying, I'm in this group, you know, by taking this pledge, I'm in this group and I'm defining an us versus them. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be open to everybody, you know. So, and whether anybody noticed or cared, it doesn't matter. To me, it was my intentionality of I don't like making distinctions of us versus them. I don't like forcing anybody into my definition of gender roles and categories and things like that. So when I see things like, as you had said, you have noticed in some meetings, you see the pronouns. That is me signaling that I respect that process and I'm willing to support anybody who wants to participate in that.
You wrapped up exactly at 12 o'clock. That's typical of you. Yeah. Before we do the four great vows, speaking of vows, we'll chant them without the bells since nobody else can hear the bells online. I did want to offer, share my pronouns with everyone. It, that, and what. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Are numberless. I vow to free them. Illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize. Thank you for your patience and listening. John, do you want to stay on for a while? We're going to break and start getting our lunch together, so we'll leave you on for a while.
Cosettes, a few of us often linger for a minute or two just to have a little more informal conversation with our speaker. Are you up for that?
Absolutely.
Shift host over to John. You want to shift host over to John? John, we can shift the host over to you.
Okay, thank you. And if you could mute your sound, that would be helpful.
I'll turn it off altogether.
Okay.
How do I switch? If you go to participants.
Cosettes, I do enjoy your stories. Thank you. I think there's a reason why most of the important wisdom has been transmitted over the centuries in stories, typically related to the listener. Jesus often populated his stories with sheep and shepherds and things like that.
Right.
The last time I was here. When did you shave it all off?
So thank you for sharing those stories.
Oh, thank you for saying that. That's how I know I can stick with what's true. You know, if it was for me, it's true. It's not hypothetical. That and I'm so glad to hear you say that because I figure that, you know, we're all human. We all have similar experiences. So if something happened to me, hope it will probably resonate with somebody in the audience, you know. Somebody's had a renovation.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah. I was very happy to hear from Nelson and his intended that when I was there several months back, Nelson was attending pretty regularly. His bride wasn't there yet, and that your stories were able to directly address the kinds of things that he and she, using the pronouns, or of direct relevance to them. So it's good to be able to relate to people on their own level. Now I made the rude comment to John that you said that your wife is a perfect mirror, and I thought of Shrek, who said that ogres are like onions. And Donkey says, you mean they make you cry? And my thought was, my wife is a perfect mirror. And I thought, she gets everything backwards.
Randy, one thing that somehow has permeated my system of beliefs and thinking that sometimes gives me solace when all hell is breaking loose, when everything is crashing and burning, when my best plans just go up in smoke. And that is that I really never know what the outcome's going to be over the long term. And I've read stories where people were one guy saved his dog and lost a leg by pushing the dog off of a track. Uh, and they often end these stories with, if I could go back and recreate, I wouldn't change a thing. Uh, Coming after uh, terrible car accidents and things like that, they somehow they find so much meaning and understanding and wisdom. So I try to practice, uh, along with not asking, I try to practice not knowing. Someone says, "Oh, that's terrible, John. You put all that work into that. I know you're totally angry and sick." Uh, I'd like to try to generate something like, "Well, I'm not sure it was a waste. We'll see. Uh, maybe there's something here worth the failure."
Right. Yeah. We were talking earlier about finding our own words, our own phrasing. You were talking about being comfortable with not knowing, which is a traditional phrase. I've used the phrase being comfortable with ambiguity. I think a lot of times those types of stories of people saying, I wouldn't change a thing, are those people who are comfortable with ambiguity, with not knowing and making the best of the current situation. Like, I uh, have been divorced, which was not fun, a terrible thing, but I wouldn't change it because now I have a lovely wife and situation now. Um, I have a family member who just a couple of weeks ago was laid off. And I was telling this family member, I said, I feel your pain. I have been hired and promoted and headhunted and poached, and I have been laid off and fired. So don't let the highs or the lows define you as a person. Roll with it and just, what do I do in this moment, in this situation? So I think that not knowing and being comfortable with ambiguity is an extremely helpful practice in building personal resilience.
If diamonds, and I know this is a cliche, but if diamonds are a lump of coal that were subjected to intense stress and pressure, I think I'm on my way to becoming a diamond.
We're all diamonds in the making, yeah.
If I can just live through the stress and pressure.
Right. Yep.
Well, we're all slightly contaminated carbon.
And I just want to say, Joseph, you may be busy, not able to voice in, but I love it when you put the little emoticons and we know you're listening and participating. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Sorry, I was caught up. I was actually eating breakfast and then I sat in at a piano and I just played a little bit of like Girl from Ipanema. But I did have this up and I've been trying to follow the transcript and the caption. But yeah, sorry if I'm a little in and out of it.
No, I'm just glad to see you there. And I'm sorry, assure you, did I cut you off saying that?
Oh, no. It was just pleasant to have the conversation as a conversation over lunch. We had at one point I had a mustache in front of my face. I have a new rescue cat that I got on Friday. And it's very difficult to take a picture of her because she constantly bumps into my face and has, apparently the house she was in before did not have computers because she has no knowledge whatsoever of what a computer keyboard is and is not for. But she's a very loving cat.
So if we send you sending random messages, we know why.
That several times I went offline because she managed to push two keys at the same time that did something bizarre, which is always my fear. But there was a movie that was based on that. Is some high school kid, they hacked into the local military base and they happened to pick up the code for launching the nuclear missiles
Was that War Games?
that had been lying around for 20
Matthew
years.
Broderick film?
Yeah, and so it was. Yeah, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know.
Yeah.
When you mentioned Joseph's emoji, I find myself wondering, for those of you that are more experienced and long-term practitioners, would it be considered appropriate or inappropriate inside the Sangha when someone makes a remark that you resonate with, to release a cascade of balloons floating or flowers floating or lots of hands clapping as they drift up toward the ceiling? Or would that be considered a little bit trite and
I think
sacrilegious?
that's appropriate because, the different, like my son's generation would do that more. The younger generation is used to doing that. Some people get frustrated because, and I haven't experimented with this, and I don't know if it's Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever, but I think you can turn it on where if you do things like just hand motions, if you do this, flowers would bloom and things like, and some people get frustrated when they're just talking with their hands and they don't know why the screen keeps doing these things.
I'm expecting at any point in the near future to be able to, when someone like Hojo says something to me, in my voice, the response will be, John couldn't make it today, but I'm his AI representative, and I'm prepared to actually do a better job than he normally does because he suffers from human limitations and is certainly not the brightest tool in the woodshed to begin with.
I don't know why.
I have been reading some old science fiction, just as it happens, where the idea of AI and the idea of a robot who responds in that manner is a very old theme. Is that yes, the robot can do a better. The robot is rather frustrated with humans because they are. They do things for no good reason, that they're weak and everything else, and if you just left it up to the robots, everything would be fine. And all of this anticipates the rules of robotics.
It's a recurring theme with Spock and Commander Data, and
Okay,
I do think it is different. If I can chime in, I feel probably obsessed with some of these questions, and I do probably need to connect and try to talk to more humans about it. So, I mean, I guess one thing I think about is like, Giuseppe Longo is a French philosopher who writes about, I don't know, philosophy of biology and information, tons of things, but he has this paper on clocks versus Turing machines. So he has this idea of, could you make a Turing machine out of clocks? And it's like, it's an utterly kind of metal or clock punk idea, but it's also somewhat inexplicable. But he imagines like this almost astrophysical scale, like sculpture, where you would inscribe all the states of a machine in steel and connect the valid transitions, and then quote unquote do computation. And basically he's just sort of getting at, it's a completely different regime from the mechanistic Cartesian universe that we enter in the digital space. But I think today with language models, they are something even beyond the digital binary. They're much closer to quantum systems. These are quantum formalisms keep emerging from the interpretability papers. And anyway, I have some really kind of probably far-fetched philosophical speculations about this, but suffice to say, I feel like it's a really profound moment, maybe geologically, in terms of media and thinking about what media is. Not just that there's some paradoxical medium that can pretend to be immediate, that can pretend to immediate speech. But and there's a deeper puzzle of like, where is the knowledge in the system? Because you've completely prevented them from storing information in any kinematic or dynamic, like there's no propositional content. It's just the geometry of the weight. So anyway, I'm not sure I can express this more clearly, but they're like a black hole, I think is maybe, or even a wormhole to a pure language universe. But this probably sounds schizophrenic in some ways. I worry about the intensity of it, but also I think it's like, these are some of the philosophical tools we have to try to grasp with, you know, what philosophers would call a machinic assemblage of enunciation. And anyway, whatever, sorry, not to overcode all this with all my crazy ideas, but I just wanted to share some of those things related to other people, not just the machine loop. But yeah.
No, this is a safe space for thinking. That's fine.
Once again, Cosetsu, thank you for sharing your Dharma talk today. You clearly generated lots of responses, resonances, reactions. Thank you for bringing that. And I'm hoping you'll plan to do that on a regular basis.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Next time I have a brainstorm, I'll actually it was Hojo's prompt, you know, you should give a Dharma talk on this.
Mhm.
And I think he doesn't say that to me. He says that in an email to you for copy me.
That's right. That's right. Well,
But
once
I'm fine with
again,
that.
okay, we'll see you all next time.